After I finished college, I had a hard time finding a job in my field. I spent several months applying for hundreds of jobs, with no more than a handful of responses. As time went on, I began to broaden my search and started applying for jobs well outside my field of study. I ended up taking a position as a barista at my local Starbucks. I figured it would be good enough to pay the bills. While I continued my search, it was hard on my ego since I spent 4 years studying only to get a job that I could have done out of high school. However, after my first few shifts, I will admit that I really did enjoy it. I've always been a big coffee drinker, and I love the smell of freshly brewed coffee. My co-workers were also great. The quiet hours in the shop were filled with laughs and inside jokes with the other baristas. This location had a lot of regular users. Some were students coming to use the free Wi-Fi, others were your typical caffeine addicts, some of whom would come in multiple times per day. There was one regular customer, however, who caused a lot of trouble. You know the kind of person who was able to find something wrong with everything. His coffee was either too hot or too cold. The lights were either too bright or not bright enough. He also had a bad habit of cutting in line. It was like he thought the rules didn't apply to him. One day he cut in line, pushing aside a sweet old lady. That was the last straw. I walked over to him and said, "That's it, Lyle. You have to go." "What? You can't talk to me like that. I'm your best customer," he barked back. Beads of sweat dripping down his round face. His breath rate accelerated as his anger built. "I saw what you did. Leave now, or I will call the police." I said I was not willing to back down. He gritted his teeth and threw his arms in the air. It reminded me of a child having a temper tantrum, like he's told no by his mother for the first time ever. I took a cautious step back in case he decided to throw a punch. Just then he lowered his arms and seemed to calm down. Then he said sarcastically, "You're right, please forgive me. I'll be out of your way." There was something unsettling about the way he said it. It was like he was implying that it was not over. I almost prefer to have a raving lunatic over someone who bottles up their anger only to explode at any minute. At least you know what to expect with the former. I didn't have time to worry about him though. He left and I was happy about it. My shift dragged on for another 3 hours. By the time I closed up, it was 9 p.m. I walked out the front door with Alice, who was one of my co-workers. Our cars were the only ones in the dark parking lot. Hers was on one side and mine was on the other side. I inched closer to my car, unaware of what was awaiting for me. When I was about 10 foot away, I saw a pair of eyes looking at me through the rear window. Someone was hiding behind my car. It could only have been Lyle. He didn't seem to notice that I saw him, and I was afraid that if he did, he might make a move. So I called out to Alice, "Hey Alice, I think I have your car keys." I know it doesn't make any sense, but that's what came out. I walked over to her car. A look of confusion was plastered all over her face. As I approached, I told her that someone was hiding behind my car and that I thought it was the angry guy from earlier. I told her not to look because I thought he might do something if he knew that we saw him. Alice agreed to give me a ride home, and I would come back the next day to get my car. I have no idea what would have happened if I didn't notice that glint from his eyes. That rage that I saw in him was truly terrifying. If a man can't control his rage in a crowded place, who knows what he's capable of doing in a dark, empty parking lot. I'm Will, and this is a story that happened to me a few years ago. It was a warm summer's evening, and I was in 9th grade. We lived in the suburbs, and there was not a lot to do for people our age. None of us had our driver's license, so we were pretty much confined to our small neighbourhood. There was a small commercial area with a coffee shop, a grocery store, and a few other businesses, including a KFC. My friends and I had nothing to do, so we decided to hit up the KFC. We would sometimes go there and buy a single drink just to hang out somewhere. They had free refills, so it could last forever. I know it's dumb, but we were bored, and it was around 10 p.m. when we got there, and the place was relatively empty. We ordered a drink and sat down at a table. There was 4 of us, me and 3 other guys. As we were sitting there, talking, an older man approached our table. He looked to be in his late 40s. He wore dirty clothes and smelled strongly of alcohol. He looked relatively thin, but he had a large gut sticking out from his shirt. At first he seemed friendly. He asked us how our night was going, and if we were doing anything else after. We responded politely, but we were really hoping he would just go away. Not that we were scared or anything. He was just interrupting our conversation. He was really telling us his life story, and we were not interested. He told us that he used to be a boxer and he bragged about his record. He also boasted about some other things that I can't remember. We were all too nervous to say anything to him. We just tried to ignore him and hoped he would leave eventually. The man did walk away. We breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that the ordeal was over. We knew that the place was closing soon, so we got up and left. My friends and I lived pretty close to each other, but my house was in the opposite direction. I said goodbye to my friends and started to walk alone down the deserted street. It was a bit eerie, but I was more concerned about getting home than anything else. I was pretty tired, so I tried to walk fast, and it was a little cold, and I was in shorts and a t-shirt. As I walked, I noticed the man from KFC was following me. I felt scared and I quickened my pace. However, the man caught up and called out to me. "Hey buddy, wait up," he shouted. I was pretty scared, but I didn't want to show it. I was concerned that if I ran, he would chase me. I turned around and forced a polite smile, but I didn't stop walking. By then the man started jogging up towards me. He started asking me some crazy personal questions, and I was becoming increasingly uncomfortable, and I was fighting my urge to run. Eventually the man tried to reach over to me. I don't know if he was going to grab me or what, but I didn't want to wait and see. I took off running as fast as I could. I looked back and he was chasing me. I ran for what felt like an eternity. My heart felt like it was going to explode. Eventually I lost him. I slowed down to catch my breath. I looked around, trying to get my bearings, but I realized I had no idea where I was or how to get home. I knew I was close to my neighborhood, but I was so scared that I ran into an area that I didn't know. I was lost and alone, and I became disorientated. The fear started to set in. I didn't have a phone with me, and there was no one to ask for help. I started walking, hoping that I would stumble upon someone familiar. As I walked, I turned around and saw that man. He was still following me. I could see him behind me. I broke into a run again, hoping that I could get away. I don't know how long I ran for, but eventually I saw a familiar landmark. It was the radio tower with the blinking light that I knew was not far from my house. I followed it and eventually made it home. I told my parents as soon as I walked in the door. We called the police the next day, but nothing was done. I was really frustrated because I would see that guy around my town sometimes, and I knew that he was dangerous. This happened when I was 20 years old. I am now in my 30s. It was my first job, and it was at a restaurant. I started as a busboy. I did that for a year or two, and then I was promoted to server. The place was a steakhouse, and was on the bottom floor of a hotel, so most of the customers were guests of the hotel, and they were all from out of town. I've been a server at the restaurant for a few years, when it took place. It was hard work, but I didn't mind it. One night I was closing up the restaurant with two of my colleagues, Brandon and Andrew. Brandon was the manager. He was in the office doing some paperwork and organising the cash. Andrew was the dishwasher. He was in charge of closing the kitchen, and I was responsible for cleaning the dining area. I was sweeping the floor and wiping down tables. Andrew was busy scrubbing the last of the pots and pans in the kitchen. As I worked my way towards the front of the restaurant, I heard a faint tapping on the door. I looked over and there was a man standing there behind the glass. He was friendly looking, with a moustache and a grey sweatpants. I assumed he was a customer who had just forgotten something, so I walked over to the door and opened it. But as soon as I did, the man burst into the restaurant aggressively. I thought that it was rude, but I didn't realise what was happening. I tried to talk to the man and asked him how I could help. Then he turned around and pulled out a large knife. He told me to give him all the money that we had. I stood there with my hands up, almost crying. He told me again to get the money, but I could hardly move. Brandon walked in from the back of the restaurant and saw what was happening. He was carrying a stack of paperwork, and when he saw the man, he dropped it due to shock. Luckily, he was able to compose himself, better than I could. He asked the man what he wanted. He barked at him to get the money. He agreed, then he went to the back, leaving me alone with the man. Brandon came back and handed it to the man, hoping he would leave without causing any more trouble. I could see the fear in Brendan's eyes as he handed over the cash, but he managed to remain reasonably calm. The man snatched the money from Brandon's hands and ran out of the restaurant, disappearing. We were all in shock, and it took us a few moments to gather our thoughts and realise what had just happened. I ran to the door and looked outside, but the man was nowhere to be seen. He was already gone. We called the police straight away and they arrived quickly. They asked us a few questions about what had happened and looked at our surveillance footage from the restaurant's cameras. Once they had that, the officers left, and we all went home for the night. It wasn't long before the police caught the man. He had been lurking in a small wooded area near the restaurant. He had a history of violent crimes, and he was on probation at the time of the armed robbery. The police were able to track him down thanks to the surveillance footage from the restaurant. His face was in full view of two separate camera angles. After the incident, Brandon, Andrew and I were all shaken up. It was our first and only robbery, and we were all grateful that nobody was hurt. We all took a few days off to recover and process what had happened. The restaurant remained closed for a few days while the police investigated the incident. We returned back to work and eventually things went back to the way they were. Thanks a million to everyone who likes, subscribes and comments on my videos. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed these stories tonight, you'll enjoy the stories in the box above. Thank you.